Samuel Mitchell stood by the wooden fence, clutching a crumpled letter in his weathered hands, watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. The wagon was supposed to bring him Elizabeth Thompson, the 22-year-old school teacher from Nebraska, who had agreed to marry him sight unseen. But when the wheels finally stopped grinding against the packed earth and the driver helped the passengers down, Samuel's world tilted sideways. A woman with auburn hair and tired eyes stepped onto his land, her worn dress telling stories of hardship. Behind her came a parade that made no sense. 4 children of different ages, each one looking as lost and uncertain as their mother. The youngest clung to her skirt, while the oldest, a boy who couldn't be more than 15, stood protective and defiant. The woman approached slowly, her chin raised despite the exhaustion written across her face. "You must be Samuel Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying both hope and desperate determination. "I'm Catherine Wells." Samuel stared at the letter in his hand, then back at the woman and her children. The name was wrong. Everything was wrong. He had sent money for a bride, not a family. He had prepared his heart for one person, not 5. But as Catherine's green eyes met his, something flickered between them that neither had expected. A recognition that went deeper than names or arrangements or carefully written letters between strangers. "I think," Catherine said quietly, glancing back at her children who waited like small soldiers behind her. "We may both be exactly where we're supposed to be." The driver was already unloading their few belongings, and the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward evening. Whatever had brought Catherine Wells to his ranch instead of Elizabeth Thompson, Samuel realized he was about to discover that some mistakes change everything. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter again, scanning the familiar handwriting he had read dozens of times over the past months. The words remained unchanged. Elizabeth Thompson would arrive on the afternoon wagon, ready to begin their new life together. But the woman standing before him was not Elizabeth Thompson, and the 4 pairs of eyes watching him with mixture of fear and curiosity belonged to children he had never agreed to shelter. Catherine stepped closer, her boots crunching against the dry earth. "There seems to be some confusion, Mr. Mitchell. The wagon driver said this was the right address, but perhaps—" She paused, studying his expression with growing concern. "You were expecting someone else." The oldest boy moved protectively beside his mother. His jaw set in a way that reminded Samuel of his own stubborn streak. "Mom, maybe we should go back to town. Find somewhere else to stay." "With what money, Daniel?" Catherine's voice carried a sharp edge of desperation she tried to hide. "We spent everything we had just getting here." Samuel looked past them to the wagon driver, who was methodically unloading a collection of worn satchels and bundles that spoke of lives packed in haste. The man avoided his gaze, focusing intently on his work, as if sensing the tension building in the afternoon air. "How did you get my name?" Samuel asked finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "How did you know to come here?" Catherine reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly, and Samuel felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. The paper was torn along one edge, and the ink was smudged in places, but he could make out fragments of his own words. The same advertisement he had placed in 3 different newspapers across Nebraska and Colorado. "A woman at the train station in Denver gave this to me," Catherine said quietly. "She said her plans had changed, that she couldn't make the journey. She thought perhaps I might be interested in the arrangement instead." Samuel's mind raced. Elizabeth Thompson had given his letter to a complete stranger. Had she decided against coming west after all? Had she taken his money and simply disappeared? The youngest child, a girl who couldn't be more than 4, tugged on Catherine's dress. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered loud enough for Samuel to hear. Catherine's composure cracked for just a moment, her hand moving to touch the child's hair with infinite tenderness. "I know, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." Samuel watched this small exchange and felt something shift inside his chest. These people were not his responsibility. He had made no promises to them, sent no money for their passage. Yet they stood on his land with nowhere else to go. And the woman's quiet dignity in the face of obvious desperation stirred something in him he thought had died years ago. But as he looked down at the torn letter again, one detail caught his attention that made his blood run cold. In the corner, barely visible, was a name written in different handwriting entirely. The name in the corner was written in pencil, faint but unmistakable. C. Wells, Silver Creek. Samuel's throat tightened as he realized someone had specifically directed Catherine to his ranch. This wasn't a random encounter or a simple case of mistaken identity. Someone wanted her here. Mrs. Wells, he said slowly, his eyes never leaving the paper. What happened to your husband? Catherine's face went pale, and she instinctively pulled the smaller children closer. He died 6 months ago. Fever took him quickly. Her voice was steady, but Samuel caught the tremor she tried to suppress. We lost the farm soon after. The bank wouldn't wait. Daniel stepped forward, his young shoulders squared with premature responsibility. We've been living in a boarding house since then, but Ma's money ran out last week. The landlord said we had to go. Samuel folded the letter carefully, his mind working through the implications. Someone had known about Catherine's desperate situation. Someone had known about his arrangement with Elizabeth Thompson, and someone had orchestrated this meeting for reasons he couldn't yet understand. The wagon driver finished unloading and approached them with obvious reluctance. Mr. Mitchell, I need to head back to town before dark. Are these folks staying or coming back with me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Samuel looked at the children. 4 young faces watching him with a mixture of hope and resignation that spoke of too much disappointment in their short lives. The girl in Catherine's arms had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, tiny fingers clutching a worn cloth doll. How do I know you're telling the truth about any of this? Samuel asked, though even as he spoke the words, he could see the authenticity of their situation in every detail, the careful mending in their clothes, the way Catherine held herself with dignity despite obvious exhaustion, the protective stance of the older children around their mother. Catherine's chin lifted. You don't, just as I don't know if you're the kind of man who would honor his word to a stranger. But I can tell you this, Mr. Mitchell, I didn't travel 300 miles with 4 children to play games or tell lies. We're here because we have nowhere else to go. The driver cleared his throat impatiently. Sorry, folks, but I really do need an answer. Samuel stared at the rambling house behind him with its empty rooms and silent hallways that had echoed with his loneliness for too many years. He thought about the simple life he had planned with Elizabeth Thompson, the quiet companionship he had hoped to find. But as he watched Catherine smooth her daughter's hair with gentle fingers, he realized his carefully ordered world was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. The question was whether he was brave enough to let it happen. Samuel's decision came without conscious thought. Driver, you can head back to town. These folks are staying. The words surprised him almost as much as they surprised everyone else. But once spoken, he felt a strange sense of rightness settle over him. Catherine's shoulders sagged with relief, though she tried to hide it. Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that we're not charity cases. I can work. I can cook, clean, tend animals. The children can help with chores. We won't be a burden to you. We'll see about that, Samuel said. But his tone had softened. He watched as Daniel gathered the smaller children around him, whispering reassurances with the practiced ease of someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. The wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving them standing in the sudden quiet of the ranch yard. Samuel found himself studying Catherine's face, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the exhaustion. She was probably close to his own age, though hardship had carved lines around her eyes that spoke of struggles he could only imagine. There are spare rooms upstairs, he said finally. Nothing fancy, but they're clean and dry. You and the little ones can take the big room at the end of the hall. The boys can share the room next to it. As they gathered their belongings and moved toward the house, Samuel caught sight of something that made him stop cold. Pinned to the inside of one of Catherine's traveling bags was a small tin-type photograph. Even from a distance, he could make out the image of a man in uniform. But it wasn't the uniform that caught his attention. It was the face. The man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to someone Samuel had known years ago, someone he had tried hard to forget. Someone who had good reason to know about both Samuel's loneliness and his recent correspondence with Elizabeth Thompson. Mrs. Wells, he called softly, his voice careful and controlled. That photograph in your bag, was that your husband? Catherine paused on the porch steps, her hand tightening on the railing. Yes, Michael Wells. He served in the cavalry before we married. She turned to face him, and Samuel saw something flicker in her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there moments before. Where did he serve? Fort Carson mostly. Why do you ask? Samuel's mouth went dry. Fort Carson, the same post where he had served as a civilian scout nearly 8 years ago. The same post where he had worked alongside a young lieutenant named Michael Wells until a bitter disagreement over Army supplies had ended their friendship and sent Samuel back to civilian life. The children had stopped chattering and were watching the adults with the intuitive awareness children develop when they sense adult tensions they don't understand. Catherine was studying Samuel's face now, her green eyes sharp and calculating. You knew him, didn't you? You knew my Michael. Samuel nodded slowly, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to fit together in his mind. But if Michael Wells had known where to find him, if Michael had somehow arranged for his widow to receive Samuel's letter, then the question that burned through him was simple and terrifying. What had Michael Wells told his wife about Samuel Mitchell? Catherine's question hung between them like a loaded rifle. Samuel could see in her expression that she was remembering conversations with her husband, perhaps putting together pieces of stories Michael had told her about his time at Fort Carson. Your husband and I worked together briefly, Samuel said carefully, but that was a long time ago. People change. Not Michael, Catherine replied with quiet intensity. He talked about his time at the fort often, especially in his final weeks. When the fever was burning through him, he mentioned names from his past. Your name came up more than once. Daniel stepped closer to his mother, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Ma, should we go inside? The little ones are getting cold. Samuel realized they were still standing in the yard. 4 tired children caught in the middle of an adult conversation they couldn't understand. Yes, he said, shaking himself back to the present. Let's get everyone settled. Inside the house, the children's voices brought life to rooms that had been silent for too long. Samuel watched as Catherine efficiently organized her family, sending the older children upstairs with the bags, while she kept the youngest close. Her movements were graceful despite her exhaustion, and he found himself noticing details he had missed before. The careful way she braided her daughter's hair, the gentle firmness in her voice when she corrected one of the boys. As evening approached, Catherine insisted on preparing supper despite Samuel's protests. You're giving us shelter, she said firmly. The least I can do is earn our keep. The meal was simple but satisfying, and Samuel was surprised by how natural it felt to have voices around his table. The children were well-mannered, though he caught them stealing curious glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking. After the dishes were cleared, Catherine tucked the younger children into bed, while Daniel and his brother explored the barn under Samuel's watchful supervision. It was during this quiet moment that Catherine approached him in the kitchen, her expression serious. Samuel, she said, using his first name for the first time. Michael left me something before he died, a letter. He made me promise to open it only if I ever found myself in desperate circumstances with nowhere else to turn. Samuel's pulse quickened. And did you open it? 3 days ago, when the landlady gave us notice. Catherine reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope yellowed with age. It contained your name, your address, and instructions to tell you that Michael Wells kept his word, even from the grave. Samuel stared at the envelope, his mind racing back to that bitter argument at Fort Carson years ago. To the promise Michael had extracted from him in their final heated exchange, to words spoken in anger that Samuel had hoped would never come back to haunt him. What promise? Catherine asked quietly. What did my husband mean? But before Samuel could answer, Daniel burst through the kitchen door, his face pale with fear. Ma, there are riders coming up the road, armed men, and they don't look friendly. Samuel moved quickly to the window, peering through the curtains at the approaching riders. 3 men on horseback, their faces obscured by the gathering dusk, but their intentions clear in the deliberate way they rode toward the house. He recognized the lead rider's posture before he could make out the face. Get the children away from the windows, he told Catherine quietly. But don't panic them. Catherine's training as a mother kicked in immediately. She moved through the house with calm efficiency, gathering the younger children and guiding them toward the back rooms. Time for bedtime stories, she announced cheerfully, though Samuel caught the steel beneath her gentle tone. Daniel remained in the kitchen, his young face set with determination. I can shoot, Mr. Mitchell. Pa taught me. Your pa was a smart man, but I can handle this, Samuel said, checking the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. Stay with your mother and the little ones. The riders stopped in the yard, and Samuel stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually, but ready. The lead man dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Evening, Samuel, the man called. Been a long time. Samuel's shoulders relaxed slightly as he recognized the voice. Jake Bradley. Heard you were working as a federal marshal now. That's right. Jake stepped into the lamplight spilling from the house, revealing a weathered face marked by years of hard living. Got a badge and everything. We're tracking some men who robbed a bank down in Silver Creek 3 days ago. Trail led us this way. The other 2 riders remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their weapons. Samuel didn't lower his rifle completely. Haven't seen any strangers passing through here, Samuel said. Just had some new arrivals today, but they came on the afternoon wagon from town. Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the house and outbuildings. Mind if we water our horses? Been riding hard for 2 days. Of course, Samuel gestured toward the well. Help yourselves. As the men tended to their horses, Jake approached the porch alone. Heard you had some excitement today. Wagon driver mentioned you took in a family, woman with several children. Samuel's grip tightened on the rifle. News travels fast. Small territory, Samuel. People talk. Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice. Thing is, one of the bank robbers was a woman. Young widow, they said, traveling with children to throw off suspicion. Wouldn't happen to match the description of your new guests, would it? The blood in Samuel's veins turned to ice water. Through the window he could see Catherine moving quietly through the house, settling the children for the night. The woman who had looked at him with such desperate honesty, who had spoken of losing her farm and her husband to fever. What did this woman look like? Samuel asked carefully. Jake pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Auburn hair, green eyes, about 30 years old, goes by the name Catherine Wells, wanted for robbery and conspiracy. He held out the paper. $500 reward for information leading to her capture. Samuel stared at the wanted poster, his mind reeling. The drawing was rough, but unmistakably recognizable. The woman sleeping under his roof. The mother, who had braided her daughter's hair with such tender care, was wanted by federal marshals. But as Jake waited for his answer, Samuel found himself remembering Michael Wells's final letter, still unopened in Catherine's possession. Whatever promise he had made to a dying man years ago, whatever debt he owed to the past, was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. Samuel stared at the wanted poster, his heart pounding against his ribs. The drawing showed a woman with auburn hair and desperate eyes, but something about it felt wrong. The face was too sharp, the expression too hardened. The woman in his house had lines of grief, not cruelty. Well, Jake pressed, the woman you took in? Samuel's mind raced through the events of the afternoon. Catherine's exhaustion had been real, the children's hunger genuine. The way she had spoken about her husband's death, the careful mending in their clothes, the protective way the older children watched over the younger ones. None of it felt like the work of a bank robber. The woman I met today has been widowed 6 months, Samuel said slowly. Lost her farm to debt. Doesn't sound like someone with stolen bank money. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Could be a cover story. These criminals get clever about their alibis. He folded the poster and tucked it back into his vest. Mind if I take a look at her? Just to be sure. Every instinct Samuel possessed screamed at him to refuse, but he couldn't afford to make Jake suspicious. She's getting the children ready for bed. Can it wait until morning? I suppose it could. Jake glanced back at his men who had finished watering their horses. We'll make camp down by the creek, head out at first light. But Samuel, his voice carried a warning. If you're harboring fugitives, that makes you an accessory. Badge or no badge, our friendship won't protect you from federal charges. After the marshals rode toward the creek, Samuel stood alone on his porch, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Through the window, he could see Catherine moving quietly through the house, and he was struck by how naturally she seemed to belong there, how the empty rooms had come alive with purpose. The kitchen door opened behind him, and Catherine stepped onto the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. The children are asking questions about the visitors. I told them they were just travelers passing through. Samuel turned to face her, studying her features in the lamplight. Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you ever been to Silver Creek? Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but fear. Yes, We lived there briefly after Michael died before we lost the farm. Why? There was a bank robbery there 3 days ago. The marshals think a woman matching your description was involved. Catherine's face went white, and she gripped the porch railing for support. Samuel, I swear to you on my children's lives, I've never stolen so much as a loaf of bread. We may be poor, but we're not thieves. The conviction in her voice was absolute, and Samuel found himself believing her completely, but belief wouldn't protect her from Jake Bradley's badge. Those marshals are camping by the creek tonight. They want to see you in the morning. Samuel watched her face carefully. There's something else. One of them knows me from years back. He won't just take my word that you're innocent. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her coat and withdrew Michael's letter. Then perhaps it's time you read what my husband wanted you to know. Because I have a feeling our lives depend on it. Samuel took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was worn soft from years of careful storage, and Michael Wells's familiar handwriting across the front read, "For Samuel Mitchell, a promise honored." Under the lamplight, Samuel broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Michael's careful script filled both sides of the paper, and as Samuel read, memories from 8 years ago came flooding back with painful clarity. Samuel, the letter began, if Catherine is reading this to you, then I am dead, and she has found herself in desperate circumstances. You are probably wondering why I directed her to you after all these years, especially given how our friendship ended. The answer lies in the promise you made to me during our last conversation at Fort Carson. You were right about the supply contracts. The corruption you discovered would have destroyed innocent families if exposed the wrong way. When you told me you would rather walk away than see women and children suffer for their husbands' mistakes, I knew you were a man of honor. But when you said you would protect any soldier's family in need, no matter the personal cost, you gave me something more precious than friendship. You gave me peace of mind. I never forgot those words, Samuel. During my darkest moments in the war, when bullets flew and death seemed certain, I held on to the knowledge that if something happened to me, there was one man I could trust to keep my family safe. You may think I trapped you with this letter, but I prefer to believe I'm giving you the chance to be the man I always knew you were. Catherine knows nothing of our history or your promise. She believes this is a simple arrangement between strangers. If you choose to honor your word, she will bring you more joy than you can imagine. If you choose to walk away, I will understand. But please, for the love I bore you as a brother in arms, at least give her and the children a chance. Samuel's hands shook as he finished reading. Catherine was watching his face intently, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. He wrote about you often in his personal journals, she said quietly. Always with respect, sometimes with regret. He said you were the most honorable man he ever knew, even when honor cost you everything. Samuel looked up at her, seeing not just the desperate widow who had arrived that afternoon, but the woman Michael Wells had loved enough to trust with his final gamble. Catherine, 8 years ago, I made your husband a promise. I told him that if any soldier's family ever needed protection, I would provide it. No questions asked. And now you're trapped by that promise, Catherine said, her voice heavy with understanding. Samuel shook his head. No, I'm freed by it. He folded the letter carefully. Because it gives me permission to do what I wanted to do the moment I saw you step off that wagon. But before Catherine could respond, Daniel burst through the door again, his face white with terror. Mr. Mitchell, there's someone else coming. A woman on horseback riding hard, and she's got a gun. The woman who rode into Samuel's yard bore a superficial resemblance to Catherine. But where Catherine's face showed the soft lines of motherhood and grief, this stranger's features were sharp with desperation and anger. Her auburn hair was darker, her build smaller, and the way she held her rifle spoke of someone accustomed to violence. You took something that belongs to me, she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. The money from Silver Creek. Where is it? Samuel stepped protectively in front of Catherine, his own rifle ready. Lady, I think you have the wrong place. The woman laughed bitterly. Don't play games with me. I know Catherine Wells came here. I've been following her for 3 days, waiting for her to lead me to where she hid my share of the money. From down by the creek came the sound of horses moving fast. Jake and his men had heard the commotion and were riding hard toward the house. The real criminal had just delivered herself to federal marshals. You're the one they're looking for, Catherine said with sudden understanding. You used my name in Silver Creek. Smart woman. Too bad you won't live to appreciate how clever I was. The stranger raised her rifle, but Samuel was faster. His shot knocked the weapon from her hands, and she tumbled from her horse just as Jake Bradley thundered into the yard. The next few minutes passed in a blur of shouted commands and the metallic click of handcuffs. The real criminal, a woman named Ruth Blackwood, who had been using stolen identities for months, confessed everything in hopes of a lighter sentence. She had heard about the widowed Catherine Wells in Silver Creek and had used her name for the bank robbery, never suspecting the real Catherine would flee west and complicate her plans. "Looks like you were right about your house guests," Jake said to Samuel as his men prepared to leave with their prisoner. "Sorry for the trouble." After the marshals departed, Samuel and Catherine found themselves alone on the porch again. The crisis that had threatened to tear them apart, now resolved. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of children's laughter from inside the house, where Daniel was entertaining his siblings with stories. "So," Catherine said softly, "what happens now? Your arrangement was for a mail-order bride, not a widow with 4 children." Samuel reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and sacrifice. "My arrangement was for someone to share my life with. The details were never as important as I thought they were." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Are you certain? This isn't what you planned?" "No," Samuel admitted, looking through the window at the children who had brought such life to his empty house. "It's better than what I planned. It's what I never knew I needed." 6 months later, Samuel Mitchell married Catherine Wells in a simple ceremony attended by all 4 children and half the town. The ranch that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of family, children's voices, Catherine's gentle singing, and the contented silence of 2 people who had found their home in each other. Michael Wells's promise had been kept, but more than that, it had given Samuel the greatest gift of all. The chance to discover that sometimes the best things in life come in packages we never expected to receive. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.